for getting some more details on, remember, that buyout program, that buyout offer that President Trump and others had given to the 2 million strong federal workforce. And I want to put this up here. A federal judge, we brought you this news, in Boston today, temporarily delayed that deadline today of February 6th at midnight for federal workers to decide whether to accept the Trump administration's fork-in-the-road deferred resignation offer, pending a hearing on Monday on whether to block it longer term here. We want to talk about all of this and the complexion and the makeup of the federal workforce and what some of these Trump allies and acolytes in the administration are trying to do to it with Brad Palumbo there, our friend, co-founder of Base Politics and Steamboat Institute Blakely Fellow. He joins me. Brad, good to see you here. I have to ask, on the federal workforce question, I believe about 40,000 or so federal workers have accepted this. The Trump administration, the Trump White House, they're anticipating or at least expecting 5 to 10% of the federal workforce to take them up on their offer. This federal judge buying them some time to get some clarity as this is litigated here. Have you spoken to federal workers? Are they down with this idea or not?
Well, I think from the ones I have heard from and from what I've read, a very small percentage of them are going to be taking this offer. So the latest data that I just saw was that it's up to 2% of the federal workforce. I think the idea from Trump and Musk of 10 to 15% is probably overshooting the mark quite significantly. There's also some concern, I guess, from what I've heard about how they could potentially ensure that this money is paid out. But I'm pretty skeptical that the federal government could actually offer people 8 months of paid kind of severance and then not deliver on it. If there's one thing the federal government usually does, it's hand out taxpayer money. And so I do actually think it would be a safe bet, but people are pretty reticent to give up these gigs, and I can understand why. But it's telling, I think, that it's actually incredibly difficult to downsize government. The way they're attempting to do it is nothing short of chaotic, we all have to admit. But if you support the goal of downsizing government, which I do, it's very frustrating. There's so many ingrained barriers to doing so, and there's so much internal resistance and so much litigation that kind of cogs up the wheels from turning. And so I can understand why they're resorting to these kinds of methods, but I don't know how ultimately successful they'll prove to be.
Okay, Brad, chaotic, yes, but what about constitutional? I mean, how can government agencies in the form of, say, Elon Musk, even, President Trump, carte blanche with the signature of a pen here, do away with, say, USAID? By tomorrow, all employees of USAID will be put on administrative leave. There was this piece in the Wall Street Journal today that the White House is preparing an order to cut thousands of federal health workers who work at HHS. A White House official told Fox that report below is not true, adding that there's no such executive order in the works. We've seen a lot of these reports, the CIA offering their employees a full buyout here. Is this a way to go about it? Do they have the authority to do this with certain federal agencies and federal workers?
Well, I think we have to separate two different things. I don't believe that the federal government, whether it's the Trump administration or anyone else, has the authority to unilaterally close down an agency that's been approved by Congress and had budget allocated for it. I don't think they have the authority to do that. So that can be challenged, and I think they will be successful in a court challenge to that. But offering rank and file employees a buyout is something different. I suspect they'll have more latitude. It will have to play out in federal court. That judge who issued the pause hasn't commented on the merits. He's just delaying so that both sides can make their arguments. I think that's kind of categorically different and much closer to something that could be within the bounds of their authority. Simply offering people payouts to resign, that's a normal corporate practice, frankly, that employers across the country do all the time, and often much less generous packages than 8 months. But it is true that Congress is supposed to have what's called the power of the purse, the power to spend taxpayer money, but they've abrogated that power. They've given it up, very much so in recent decades. And I do have to say, I always want the proper constitutional process to be followed, but it is a bit rich to hear Democrats screeching about this, because they clapped when Biden tried to spend $400 billion without Congress on a student loan bailout that he
Sure.
did via executive order that was ultimately struck down by the Supreme Court for this very reason. Democrats lauded him for that, even though Congress had specifically considered spending that money, decided not to, and Biden said, I'll just do it myself. So if you want to have a strict interpretation of these powers, I support that. But I detect a lot of fair weather constitutionalism in the political discourse right now. Republicans who were screaming about Biden doing this kind of thing are now more or less fine with it because Trump's doing it, but also vice versa. Democrats suddenly are making arguments that sound a lot like what critics were saying when Biden was president when they were cheering.
Yeah, I mean, we have a live picture there of the Senate floor. I brought the news that sometime next week, I believe next Thursday, the confirmation hearing for Linda McMahon will take place. She's tapped to lead the Department of Education. Trump and his acolytes and allies, they want to do away with the Department of Education. And so essentially, why would you need a cabinet secretary in that position for a department that you want to cease to exist here? I'm just asking essentially about, whose role is what in all of this? Are you comfortable with the unilateral executive actions that we have seen with the makeup of the federal workforce, federal agencies writ large here? Is the federal workforce too bloated? Does it need to be cut?
Well, first off, on the latter part of the question, unequivocally, the answer is yes. The federal government has its hands in far too many things. It's grown to an inordinate size, and our country is going bankrupt. We're buried in debt, and something has to give at some point, whether it's entitlement programs, whether it's military spending, and yes, to some extent, the federal workforce, though obviously the percentages are smaller on that front.
Okay.
But to the other question, how you do it matters, and they are doing it far too chaotically. I can't speak to the constitutionality of everything they're doing. Some of it's quite complicated, but I can at least say I appreciate them trying to do something. Republicans for so long have promised to cut government and then actually grown it massively. I can appreciate the fact that they're trying to do it. If they're going too far outside the bounds of the law, then obviously that's not the right way to do it. But some part of this again comes from Congress just totally not doing their jobs. They don't pass budget bills anymore. They write laws that say this agency can spend this amount on whatever they want with this vague goal. They've basically abdicated this. They've given the president huge statutory authorities that are far beyond what the president is supposed to have. So then, well, when a president tries to take some of that leeway they've been given and run with it, Congress is suddenly complaining that their power is being infringed upon, doesn't have the same credibility to it. In terms of whether unilaterally shutting down agencies like the Department of Education, I agree. You need a bill through Congress. Thomas Massie, the congressman from Kentucky, has introduced legislation to do exactly that. And Republicans should just take up that legislation and pass it and then shut down the Department of Education. I would honestly say about 90% of what the Department of Education does isn't necessary. And the necessary 10% could be integrated into other agencies. There's so much bureaucracy. There's a lot of misconceptions about the DOE. It doesn't teach students. It doesn't pay teachers. That's almost all done at the state and local level.
Sure.
There wasn't even a Department of Education in its current form until like 1980. So getting rid of it, critics will fearmonger about this and say like they're defunding teachers, they're bankrupting your schools.
Right.
It's actually a lot of subsidy programs and regulations and one size fits all oversight and bureaucracy. So getting rid of it is not the radical idea that some wanted to make it out to be, but they should go through a proper process to do so.
In the Free Press today, former Education Secretary Betsy DeVos, in the first Trump administration, she penned an op-ed saying that she endorses this idea. I mean, she led the agency and she's all for it. So I thought that was quite striking here. Is, though, Elon Musk the most effective communicator and strategist and messenger for all of what we have just been talking about? Or should it be delegated to someone else in the Trump White House? And should they have started here with the federal workforce? You mentioned some of these other very, very bloated budgets, like the Pentagon and others, like Health and Human Services. Is it even going to make a difference? The intentions might be there to shrink the government, but will anyone even notice?
Well, they always will. I mean, we are still talking about billions of dollars that could be spent on something else or returned to taxpayers. So that still matters, even if it's a small amount relative to the massive size of federal spending. But Elon, look, he's obviously a genius in his field, but he doesn't know how government works. And so he's very much a bull in a china shop right now. And he also seems to be putting faith in people and information that half the time seems to be incorrect. So I do have some concerns about the haphazard approach that he's taking. But I will say, I'm of two minds of it, because it's also nice to see somebody actually taking action, actually trying to do something, actually trying to deliver on downsizing government. Just Republicans for so long would just say they want small government and then get into power and spend more and agree with the Democrats. We'll give you more money for your pet projects if you give it for ours. If you give us earmarks, we'll give you earmarks for your home district. But does Elon, is he really going to be able to tame this beast when he's an outsider? Yes, you could look at it positively that way, but also you could say he has no experience in government. He doesn't know how this complicated beast operates, and he's bringing in these outside engineers to fix it with code or something. I'm kind of skeptical that that will ultimately work out well.
Yeah, I mean, Trump and Speaker Mike Johnson, they met for almost 5 hours today in the White House, talking about federal funding priorities. We got a government shutdown deadline coming up very, very soon, March 14th. And I would venture to say that I would imagine that a lot of this will come to a head before then. And so we'll just have to wait and see. Brad Palumbo, as always, thanks so much for joining us, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks.